19th century form is one of recreating. It's not creative. And let's say an orchestra would use the power of a musician maybe to 40 or 50% of what they are able to deliver.
So there's a whole resource of untapped energy there.
Absolutely. Which I think could mean that music moves back in time rather than forwards in time. Or maybe it moves back in time in order to move forward. And by that, I mean, let's think about the role of a musician in Mozart's time or Haydn's time or Brahms' time. Now, the level of playing probably wasn't as high as it is now. I mean, orchestras have probably never played as well as they do now. But we've lost something in that drive for excellence, and that drive for what I would call the clinical recording method of performance. And if we go back in time, musicians' lives, I think, were far more varied, far more interesting. They weren't just specialists on one instrument. They may have been specialists on several instruments. They would compose, they would arrange, they would teach, they would be in the community. But we all think about those golden times of music. And it's a golden time, absolutely. And it was a golden time for the role of musicians, because the role of musicians was far more relevant than it is today.
Music was a fundamental part of, it had a role in society.
Yes.
And there was a real connection with why music and musicians were important.
Yes.
So that's what we need to try and get back to now.
We do, yeah.
So with your work with the orchestras so far, have you had a chance to be able to manage some, I mean, I'm sure the logistical challenges these days are immense to try and get that kind of flexibility. Were you able to instill some of that?
Yes, I mean, I had many, many interesting debates and many, many interesting initiatives as far as that was concerned. But I think what it would mean is having the courage to dismantle something.
So you have to take it apart and then put it back together.
You do,
without tinkering, as you said.
and you need some real strong research and development gumption in order to do that. To pull it apart in a very constructive way, in a very meaningful way, bringing the musicians into it and the need for it, rather than leaving it where it is at the moment. Leaving it in about 1890, which is where I think it's locked, leaving it in the sense of this feeling of denial that the problems are external to us, rather than we are absolutely central to the problems and we've created many of them.
So what is going to be the key to getting to this point? Does it need some kindred spirits like yourself to take that to their organisations? Does it need people from outside the business to articulate this? Does it need students today to go into orchestras and talk about this? How do you see this might happen?
I think it needs to happen with a great deal of thought. It needs to happen with courage, and it needs to happen with transparency and honesty. And if we're going to be transparent and honest about it, rather than thinking, oh, we have to keep up a really good PR front here, otherwise sponsors and donors are not going to be supporting us, you have to ask, well, how sustainable is all of this going to be in terms of a financial model for the future, without facing up to some of these really intrinsic systemic challenges that we have at the moment. So if we are going to be honest and transparent, and if we can bring people into the debate and say, okay, this is where the current trends are going to take us. This is the edge of the abyss at some point. Maybe it doesn't happen to 100%, but it's going to happen to a very large percent. And we can't do that because we're responsible for this amazing art form, its creation and its power for the future. Why think of depriving people of that? And if we can draw people into that debate, if we can look at some research and development, if we can get in some major investors, maybe some foundations, to say, yeah, there are some new paradigms we can take a look at here without people feeling threatened, without people feeling exploited. And I absolutely don't understand how people can possibly feel exploited given the current current system. But if they do, overcoming that and getting in some new thoughts and musicians with a wider skills base than the one of sheer excellence that we have at the moment. That's not to denigrate excellence, but it's to say that we need to develop from there.
Gosh. So how is that going to happen? I'm imagining that you're probably going to be leading that at the NEC. I would imagine with some of the orchestral programs, some of the new ideas that you might be bringing in with the teaching.
Yes.
Is this this kind of ethos, is that something that you would like to continue working on?
Oh, absolutely. And you know, I see it across the country here. I see it at so many conservatories owning up to these challenges and thinking about the type of musician they want to train and the sort of skills they need to have to be successful. But more than just being successful, allowing the art form to thrive and prosper for the future as well. So you hear all sorts of wonderful descriptions of entrepreneurship, which I think Eastman is an absolutely classical example of that. I hear of those ideas at the Manhattan School, at Juilliard, and at many others around the country, of looking at new skills for musicians. And if we can forge a better relationship with the employers, that is, with the orchestras themselves, to say, look, we're alive to this, and we're trying to look at a different skill space for our musicians. We're trying to look at a whole package of what can be offered. We're looking at new programs that might develop the idea of an Animateur program in this country that could really benefit orchestras. Come and be partners with us. Allow these things to happen for our future.
So do you see, it sounds to me like you do see that there needs to be a much better, closer connection, a much closer debate between orchestras and music schools.
Yeah, and that has not happened to date. I mean, it's happened maybe in terms of individual relationships, but it's not happened field to field.
That's an interesting question. Now that you have a perspective on both sides, do you have an idea as to why that might not have happened? Is it just because it never occurred to people, or there are major communication issues between the two sides of the business, if you like?
I think maybe it settles into perhaps the most dismissive thing that we can do, which is to attach blame. You know, it's your fault, NEC, because you didn't train the musicians that we need, and the conservatory is saying, well, it's your fault, orchestras, because you're stuck in the 1890s. So let's get rid of blame, and let's look at opportunity and some really exciting creative ideas for the future.
Okay, so I would imagine you must work very closely with the Boston Symphony, so I'm thinking there must be some collaborations there. At Eastman we work with the RPO, the Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra, so I'm thinking that there's also a wider place for the orchestral world and the conservatory world to work in general.
Yes,
I would think.
And maybe we just need lots and lots of models of good practice really to break this down.
Okay.